when someone came up with internet protocols, we had the feeling that this was the kind of development that might really change things. This has that same feeling. The risk here is the thing you bought is just it's a JPEG. If we all agree that something has value, then owning it will definitely have value. The vision, we get to a point where it's not only about your community valuing this, but the internet is going to value it. Ownership of this means something a lot deeper. What that means is you can do more things with it. It unlocks all sorts of ways for us to turn value on the internet into, actually making a living.
Welcome to the Generation Hustle Podcast, a show that explores the world of business, entrepreneurship, and culture, all centered around the millennial. I'm your co-host Sherrison, alongside my good friend Amin, and this week we're exploring the future of the internet. Episode 61 is with Ben Scher, co-founder and CEO at Dime. Dime is tackling the biggest problem in one of the hottest areas in tech, NFTs. Dime helps turn your content into genuine digital collectibles for your followers to buy, sell, trade, and collect. While NFTs have the potential to transform the way we create art, use the internet, play games, and much more, we still need a system in place that's powerful enough and easy and clear enough for everyone to use. Dime is the first NFT marketplace to not require a crypto wallet, the first to transact purely in USD, and most importantly, the first marketplace that ordinary people will want to use. So we talked to Ben about the utility of NFTs, the blockchain, and Web 3.0. We discussed the future of these technologies and how creators will be significantly impacted by this space. If you're looking to stay ahead of the next big shift on the internet, this episode is a must.
I brought up my OK Boomer hat today just because we're talking about NFTs in the blockchain space. So, let's just have fun with this. So,
I've got mine on symbolically. So.
Okay, got it. So thanks so much. Today we have Ben on the show. Ben is the founder of Dime. And it's a Dime Collect, or is that's the website name?
It's just Dime. We're at dime.io now.
Yeah. Awesome. So, before we get into the questions, let's just maybe hear about you, your background, up to the point of starting Dime.
Yeah, great to be on. Great to talk with you guys. So my name is Ben. I'm from San Francisco originally. One of the few people actually from there. Most of us seem to sort of have fled to other places.
Right.
I was interested in a whole bunch of things when I grew up. I was always very into animals and thought I might vet stuff, or I was really into math for a while, and I just randomly took like one computer science class in high school and then just like fell in love with it. I thought it was sort of like the solution to sort of all the different things I've been looking for. Ended up going to Stanford, did CS there, studied AI mostly, and then worked at Google for a year, and left there to start Dime with one of my really good friends from high school. So it's been a path, but I think really, really happy with where it's led.
That's awesome. So, one of the things I'd love to learn, because obviously you're in the NFT space now, is how did you first come across like Web3 and maybe some of the projects in the space and maybe blockchain in general? Just because, it's a huge booming industry now, or it's still growing, but in the early years, nobody had an idea what it was.
No, absolutely. I think one of the things that most people I talk to about this kind of thing always have the same, but it's so crazy. I don't know anything about crypto. Can I even get into this? And I think that is always very reassuring for me. Is that is honestly like still how I feel to some degree, but certainly how I felt when I was getting into it. I think you can come at it from all these different angles, and I think the angle that helped for me was I just think like when people talk about Web3 and people talk about sort of the digital ownership and sort of revolutionizing that, there's a lot of hype around that, and there's a lot of pictures that can create in people's minds. But the core thing that means is this technical idea, and it's something that I just think is really, really exciting. And so I think that's like the angle that I came at it from first, and it sort of took a while to get through the chatter for me. But I think at that point it was, hey, this seems like a really cool thing that, when someone came up with internet protocols, we had the feeling that this was the kind of development that might really change things. This has that same feeling.
Yeah, so for our audience that are not familiar with Web3, could you kind of explain what it is in nature? Because I think people just hear this word so often, either LinkedIn or other channels, whatever they're part of, and sometimes have no clue what they're talking about. It's just like a coin term nowadays.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's like it gets blown up so much, and there's so much sort of buzz or whatever. But I think at its core, really, it's just saying is for a really long time, the internet has relied on all these sort of central authorities to let you know sort of who's got what on the internet and what is real and what's not. And that's done pretty well. We've gotten pretty far, but there are all sorts of things you can do if you don't have to rely on this, a Google or a Facebook to really sort of be the one telling you that. So Web3 is really just about what if there was a way that we could sort of, decentralize, and that's where that word sort of always comes up, that ownership, so that if I tell you, hey, I want to sell you this thing, you don't actually have to ask anyone else if I'm capable of doing that. I can literally just show you the proof of that. And if you can do that, then there's all sorts of other things you can build as a result.
Yeah, and I think that's such a perfect and easy explanation. One thing I maybe have an extension to that is blockchain, obviously, because that's
Totally.
like the underlying roots. Why do you feel like that is such an important kind of tool or infrastructure for us in the future, in a way for us to transact, manage assets, make payments? I know, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago. It was like crazy hype around the blockchain and people are
Totally.
thinking about investing in it and stuff like that. But now you're actually seeing so many different projects come about. So why is it so important that we kind of continually invest and maybe grow in this space?
Well, I mean, I think it really is. I mean, people will tell you two different things. One is blockchain's the future. Get in now. It'll go big. And like, sure, okay, you can do that. My attitude is really, if if you believe that the technology, just in terms of what it lets you do that we can't do today, that it's going to get there, then blockchain really is sort of, I view it really as just the tool, where if sort of decentralization and mutual trust and all the things that come with that is what we're trying to achieve, you have to build out the infrastructure and it has to be really good. And so this is really the tool to get there. Um, and in some ways, I think it really is, it does make a lot of sense to me in terms of, we went from when you want to pay someone for something, you got to give them sort of a weight of gold. And then that's a very physical concept of value, where you give them a chicken or a loaf of bread or something, and we've gotten better and better about abstracting it. And I think in a lot of ways this really is kind of, I think, an ultimate step in that direction of how can we codify value in this really clean way, where if I have value, I shouldn't need someone else to tell you that I have it, and when I give it to you, it should basically just be sort of like a tick in the register. And that is really what it tries to do, and I think does a pretty good job of.
Absolutely. I really like that point that you just said. How do you codify value? Because it kind of leads into my question here, Ben. Obviously, over the last couple of years, we've seen a huge craze around NFTs, non-fungible tokens. Obviously, a lot of people are still just throwing it out there. They don't know what it means. So could you kind of explain to our audience what an NFT is? Because I think it's important to kind of understand that before we get into how it's valuable.
Totally, yeah. um I like to, again, with all of these things, take the sort of like two angles on it. One is like at its most fundamental level, literally what an NFT is the blockchain is basically just a register of who owns what. And so when I say I own an NFT, someone has created something that lives at exactly one place on the blockchain. And what that means is also the blockchain can only recognize one owner for it. And so when I say I own it, what I'm saying is that the blockchain thinks I own it. And so anyone who cares about what the blockchain thinks will know that I'm the one who the blockchain thinks owns it. And so that also gives me the ability to change who the blockchain says own it. An example, to sell it for a certain price, and now it'll say that you own it if you paid me. So that's like the very core. That's like literally what an NFT is. And then the potential of that is you can tie all sorts of things to that ownership. So I take an art piece, I take a photo, I take a video, I take really anything, any digital item. If you associate it with that storage on the blockchain, now you've got just really, like, again, this sort of decentralized, sort of absolute truth feeling of the person who owns that. And the reason that's really powerful is digital ownership is really hard, because as soon as something is publicly available, it gets copied and it gets distributed. This is something you can't do that with. And so someone else can copy sort of pixels of something, but no one can change who that ownership belongs to. And, if all you care about is the pixels, then that won't matter to you. But if you care about that ownership, then that means something really profound, because it means that no one else can take that ownership for you. And that's kind of the first time we've had that on the web.
Absolutely. And I think that goes into the concept of utility. So that was going to be my next question here. And it kind of how, if you can explain what that means in this space, because like you said, obviously the ownership makes the NFT valuable, but we also are seeing all these, crypto punks of images of
Totally.
apes going for millions of dollars, right? And it's
Yeah,
like, what's going on here? How is that working?
definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think this is like a fundamental problem that the space has to deal with. And I think it's gotten by dealing with it for a long time because a lot of the people who are in the space just are crazy enough about it that they're willing to pay lots of money for things without really having the value sold to them very well. And so, I mean, I think that's like a perfect example, right? Like by no sort of traditional system is a photo of like a very, like pretty poor photo, honestly, of an ape or of a vampire or of a cat or whatever. Is it worth sort of that amount of money? So instead, what's happening is that people are valuing the ownership just because they're valuing the ownership. And a lot of that has to do with they've already bought into the notion that the blockchain is really important and that ownership on the chain is important. I think for other people, you need to do a little bit more work. And if you want to describe to someone what is the utility of this, I need to tell you what owning that actually is going to mean. And I think there's lots of different things it can mean. I think right now it can do things like, if you have access to that, it can get you access to other things. If I have the ownership of that and someone else values it, it lets me sell it. It lets other people see that I'm the one to own it. So you can understand where if you build a community where people have an understanding of this, then you really start to get sort of, if we all agree that something has value, then owning it will definitely have value. But I think the other half of it is that really, I think the vision is that, we get to a point where it's not only about your community valuing this, but the internet is going to value it. And there are just going to be so many places on the internet where the things you own are going to be really important. And at that point, okay, this is starting to feel a lot closer like the reason why we care about owning things in the real world.
For sure. Yeah. And you made an interesting point there in terms of if everyone thinks it's valuable, then the value will go up. And so the perceived value of it, is that kind of comparable to kind of how we see art right now, or like, I guess in the old world, how we view artworks and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably an art master would disagree with me that there's some sort of inherent value with it. And I would certainly state I think there's probably more inherent value to sort of great works of art than there currently are to like CryptoPunks or whatever. But I will say I think there is a similar feature, and I think in particular, like people invest in art, and a lot of that is because they have a lot of money and they enjoy really fine art, but a lot of it is speculative. And I think the distinction there is if I sort of buy a piece of artwork because I think it's amazing and so I think people, I want to own it, and or I think people might pay a lot of money for it in the future. That's great. But if I buy a piece of art just because I think the price will go up, and so I think I can make a profit if I flip it, that's where I think we're in really similar territory here, where, it doesn't actually matter how good the art is. It just matters, am I right? Is someone else going to value it more? And I think that's a lot of what we've seen.
That's fair. That's fair. So on that note, can you share any projects that you've been invested in? You don't need to share the value if you don't want to, but we want to understand what you're invested in and what you liked about those projects or those artworks or whatever it is.
Totally, yeah. Sorry, do you mean within the like NFT space?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I'm actually not personally invested in any. I think my general rule is I have to be like very confident about something before the sort of personal anxiety gets overweighed by the net monetary benefit or whatever.
For
But
sure.
I will say I have of sort of the ones I've seen. I think there's a whole range of them. I think the ones that to me speak the most are the ones that have identified a super specific use case for this, where it's clearly something that the creators are really familiar with, and then I feel like they've created a really good solution for that. I think Masterworks is one really big one. I think the creator might be a Stanford person, so I vaguely sort of knew them from that or something. But I think they did a great job with it. I think they were just sort of like first on the market for that, and I think they like it was a really good sort of matching of the people you're talking to. Let's create a platform that will exactly speak to them. So I think they did a great job. Uh, Someone I know pretty well is he's a founder of Autograph.io.
Okay.
They basically their version is NFTs, but it's very sort of like black tie sort of celebrity vibes. And I think again the thing that just I think they did a great job with is that's the people they've got on there, and the platform absolutely sort of fits that. and it makes me
Right.
feel like if I were a celebrity, okay, that is, that's probably where I'd want to go to sort of publish that kind of thing. Yeah.
Fair.
Islands.xyz is another great one.
Okay.
Where I think they same thing as that one except with Gen Z, which I think is a great. Choose your focus, choose your what you know, and sort of go there.
Yeah, how much do you think, like, say, the community aspect also amplifies, say, some of the one, we know it obviously amplifies value, but just say the utility or the project as a whole or the company that you're trying to build? Because one of the things I've seen in the space, especially, is we have this much people in our Discord channel and stuff like that.
Totally.
So can you describe the importance of that within this space, or and maybe beyond, just in a general business sense of why community is so important to build a good business today?
Definitely, yeah. I think it's a funny one because I think if you compare sort of like the press release that a startup would give today versus 10 years ago or whatever, they'll talk a lot more about their Twitter following or their Discord or whatever. And I think part of that is just awareness that if you're trying to grow this over a really long amount of time, your revenue today is important, but how many people are interested in following your updates and excited to learn more is maybe an even better indicator for how things are going to look a year from now or 5 years from now. Um, but I will also say I think within this space, I actually think this is like I think it's even sort of like an order of magnitude more important because of I think what we talked about earlier, which is if we get to the point that when you sign into Gmail, it checks what Ethereum NFTs you own to know like which settings to use or which new color palettes you've unlocked. At that point, okay, the value prop is really clear. We probably don't need to do any more work to sort of sell people on why if I own a lot, if I've helped create a lot of those things, that's an important service. But today, I think because of what we talked about in terms of like, community values, and if I have a community that values the things I own, then I care more about owning those things. I think because that's such a big part of sort of getting things off the ground with like this new sort of platform, I think that's even more crucial for early NFT companies.
Yeah. And maybe a basic analogy I can always give is like, that 80-20 rule where like 20% of your customers bring 80% of your revenue. If you have these diehard advocates, you're kind of already building that funnel towards, having,
Yeah, absolutely.
lifelong, almost like lifetime value of for your solution and your product. So that's like the most basic analogy I'd usually give of why a community is so valuable. And if you have diehard advocates that, love your brand, especially, I always come back to Tesla and think about they don't invest in marketing, they don't do anything. They have Elon, and people are just like diehard Elon fans and
Yeah,
love the product. And you just see like Tesla's flying off the shelves. Well, technically, if they get the production right, but
right.
that's kind of the analogy I always go back into.
No, absolutely. Yeah,
That's awesome. So, one of the things that also happened within the space are obviously shady things. And so, one of the things that we like to dispose is, what can be done in a better manner in terms of managing the trust within the space. So, one of the things that I recently came across was the idea of rug pulls, and
yeah,
so there's a recent project called Evolved Apes where this happened, where the developer kind of just had everyone invest and buy whatever, and he just vanished. So took the money, and there was no really any project left. So one of the things I'd love to hear from you is, first, what is a rug pull, and two, how is this impacting kind of the ecosystem and trust? Because blockchain inherently is about trust, but
yeah,
people are taking advantage of the situation and doing nefarious things.
yeah. Um, One thing I would say about this is, I mean, I think this kind of stuff is like it's awful, and it's literally just like it's people sort of defrauding people out of their money, and it has a lot of like pyramid scheme type feelings to it. Um, and one thing I'll say is I think, in some ways, and I think the fact that we've seen a lot of non-blockchain pyramid schemes in the world, like really, I think this is just sort of people doing sort of like shady people things in like this new space that of course as soon as you make it open to them they'll do it. But I
Right.
mean the basic thing here is like we said, one of the challenges is that the value of the thing is a lot harder to pin down than a loaf of bread. Like we know sort of what a loaf of bread is doing, But here, this is really about, the value of an evolved ape, let's say, is really often a function of what other people believe the value of an evolved ape is, which means that if you can convince a whole lot of people that a whole lot of other people really care, that everyone's okay sort of putting the value really high. And so if I'm the one who creates all these things, and I promise you that sort of, you know, ownership of one of these is going to be really important, and there's this whole community and lots of other people who care, and I've developed all this stuff where if you've got one of these, you get all these perks and you're a VIP. And so I managed to ratchet it up so that a lot of people are willing to put the price really high. You get a bunch of people who now buy them. All the money goes to me because I created them. And now they've got these passports or these photos of these apes that now they own this. And then I sort of dip out, and all the value that I promised was going to come with this just sort of collapses. And now I think the risk here is the thing you bought is just it's a JPEG. So that's the thing you own. The person who created it can't take that from you. That's the whole point of the chain. But I think it is important to remember that, like, the thing that you bought and the thing that the chain actually guarantees is the content that lives there. And if there's other stuff that goes around it, that's like social value. And if someone promises you certain social value along with it, they absolutely should deliver it. But I think it's a really sort of it's an important thing to watch out for, because a lot of people are really trying to capitalize off of this and tell you that's there when it really is not going to be.
Yeah, there's been so many different scenarios, even just like with coins and stuff like that. I think Squid Games was a great example of that recently. I was just watching CoffeeZilla, and he was kind of explaining that through his YouTube channel of how that kind of worked out. So for people that are trying to make informed decisions about investing in this space or buying NFTs, what would you say, what approaches would you take to kind of say validate an idea or a project? And what are some common red flags that you maybe would see and would want to avoid as a investor or purchaser in the NFT space?
Yeah. Probably just the most reliable one is if the thing is just getting started and if it's super new and there's a lot of like noise around it, but nothing really exists yet, or you don't have any sort of record, tread carefully. And most people like the common sort of rhetoric they'll use is, hey, don't wait. You want to be one of the first ones to get in before it, blows up. And like, it's like a little true, but mostly not. And the reality is, if you wait a couple weeks, make sure it's sort of still stable, that the people who have bought into it are not regretting that decision. That'll probably give you a little more time to see what the community is like, feel like the people who sort of spent time creating this are really invested in it, are not going to dip out suddenly. I think do sort of due diligence. And I think there's a lot of other areas in society where we take risks like that, but we know that they're risks. And so we've learned what that diligence looks like. And I think this is this very new space where it's the equivalent of just sort of, throwing a bunch of money onto the stock market on something that, except the stocks are sort of way more volatile and can be, they're not these publicly held companies. Instead, it's sort of your next door neighbor who decided that they wanted to create, ape stocks. You put it all in that and they say, oh, I didn't realize you were going to invest in this. I don't have anything here. And then, the value plummets and you lose all your savings. So don't do that. Yeah. And I think but it's like people will make really compelling pitches and will tell you that it's really hype and they've got a whole community. So I think just like try to wait a little bit, see for yourself, and hopefully that helps.
Yeah, maybe an extension of that would be, I know people hate this word in this space, regulation.
Yeah.
But do you think some frameworks and or structures should be kind of enabled to kind of protect individuals, obviously, that are a little less informed than others and just kind of going after the hype? For example, obviously the stock market is pretty highly regulated in terms of information
Yeah.
that's available and how it's managed and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on that? And then maybe I'll go into the idea of this whole space being a money laundering tool, and you can kind of
Yeah.
talk about that.
I think those ideas lead into each other, because uh, I think the amount of resistance we've seen to like regulation entering the space, I think is a pretty good indicator that the people who are already in the space know that lack of regulation is kind of doing them a favor. And I think it's because of things like this. This is not necessarily always sort of a super good deal for new people entering the space. Um, I think regulation is not at all incompatible with sort of the Web3 world, and I think in some ways it may look different, but there are ways for you to like code regulation into the system, and all sorts of things. Like if I, the classic sort of, if I own a bunch of stock and I convince someone else to buy it, the stock price goes up, so that I can now sell my stock while it's high, and then it crashes again on everyone who's bought in recently. The equivalent works here, but the the nice thing, and kind of the whole point of this, is you can actually stop someone from doing that just through the way the system is designed, where this isn't even like a law. It's just, hey, if I sort of, whatever it means to sort of enter new people into the system, but if I've sort of sold a certain amount of this, or new people have bought a certain version of a token, put some sort of time cap before I'm allowed to sell all of mine again, right? Like you can do sort of various common sense things like that, where, if you're sort of a diehard, like, crypto freedom, this is sort of all about personal autonomy. Okay, I understand the rhetoric there, but there are very small sacrifices we can make that totally fit within the nature of Web3 that would help make people a lot safer when they're coming into the space.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to look at it. Obviously, there's always going to be nefarious players everywhere, and it's just up to us to kind of be up to date with the knowledge that we have at hand, right? And so you've kind of established what NFTs are and how they're useful, but let's shift into what you're building at Dime. So where
Definitely.
your goal is to make the easiest way to turn your content into unique digital collectibles. So first off, let's just start with the idea behind it. You said you started this with a friend of yours. So how did you guys come up with the idea and kind of start Dime?
Definitely, yeah. So I had been sort of like interested in the NFT space for a while, and I think it's funny because things sort of kept stopping me from getting too far into it. Where I thought it was very interesting. I thought there was a lot of like, if this felt like a big sort of potential space, and then every time I tried to like buy something, it's just the whole process of doing that just turned me off so much, because it's complicated. There's just so many steps and so many things you have to do, and then it's also pretty insular, where you feel like it doesn't feel like sort of the rest of the internet, which feels very interconnected. And when you sign into this application with your Google account, and then that actually is linked to your Facebook, and when you post something, you've got the same friends across different it's really its own world, and it's very anonymous, and it's sort of this whole sort of separate part. And so I think when we sort of were thinking about problems in the world, and problems with the tech that hopefully is in a place to solve them, I think this is one we kept coming back to, because there are just so many reasons to think that NFTs and Web3 is going to play this really big part in our future. And yet, if you want to get into it, it just feels so hard to do, and so not at the right place for most ordinary people. And so that's sort of where we start. And that's really what we're all about, is if I want to create an NFT, or to buy one, or to explore what's out there, and understand the system a little better, there are so many barriers to doing that, and they just should not be there. And so that's what we try to offer to people.
Absolutely. So I want to dive into kind of those barriers that you're speaking on. So can you walk us through like the typical NFT purchase and creation process, and then kind of how Dime is making that simpler?
Totally, yeah. So fundamental thing is you've got to have some currency in the system. So the classic one is you're going to buy things on Ethereum, and that's just sort of the biggest chain that things are being built on. And so this means if I go to OpenSea, which is the biggest place for all of this, they've got 10 times the transaction volume of the next closest one. I go there, I say, hey, look, that's an NFT that I want to build, that I want to buy. It's not an ape, so it looks cool. That's a great painting or something. So I go there and I want to buy it, and the first thing to do is I have to get a wallet. And this is a wallet is just the concept of it's a little piece of software that basically holds all your crypto assets. And that's simple, but the problem is getting a wallet is not. You have to register and get it connected with all sorts of other accounts, and you have to pay a certain amount of Ethereum in order to do all of this, which means that you have to own Ethereum, which means that you have to go purchase some. And if you don't know anything about the space and you haven't done any of this before, it's just a huge complicated process. And again, all of that is stuff you have to do before you're in the system to then be able to try creating an NFT or purchasing one. And then at that point, you get gas fees, which are basically, because it's expensive to run the chain, there's prices associated with doing a transaction, and often that's passed on to you if you're the buyer or the creator. And so it just means that by the time you even get to buying the thing, you've sort of spent, a whole bunch of time and probably half the money of the thing just getting there. And then you buy it, and then it lives in your wallet. And so it feels like there's just so many barriers of getting in there, and a lot of those are just logistical, but a lot of them are conceptual, where if I don't know how any of this works, it just feels like this very complicated foreign land to me. And if we're going to get to the point where Web3 really realizes its potential and is really, across the internet, the experience just cannot look that way, because you'll just never get, 90% of people out there.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that you've mentioned it quite a bit throughout this conversation, and kind of the future impact of NFTs and Web3 and kind of where we're headed. So with that in mind, if I'm a creator, can you kind of speak to that of why NFTs are the future? And I mean, let's use this as an example, right? We run a podcast, we are creators. So why are NFTs the future and Web3 the future? Like, what is that going to look like for us?
Absolutely.
And so I guess that would help us or help our audience as well understand better why we should kind of look into this process and get involved.
Totally. Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's this really interesting thing of, in the internet age, like, if you can command people's attention, that's like one of the most valuable things you can do on the internet, because, that's where sort of eyeballs go and whatever. But what's weird about this is, if I produce content that a lot of people consume, everyone agrees I'm doing something really valuable, but we still don't really have a great way of turning that value into actual, like, money for me. Really, the best thing, we have the same answer we did sort of decades ago, which is run ads. So if you watch my content for 10 minutes, now we interrupt your viewing with, 30 seconds of ads, and you get as a sponsor, and maybe you'll buy one of those things. And now you've paid me very indirectly, because you saw like a shaving cream ad, or like a Toyota ad or something, and I'm talking to you about something utterly unrelated. It's this, like, very, like, I think we're so used to it that it doesn't strike us how weird that is, that, like, that is really the best we can do. And so this is the in when this if this works the way we want it to, this allows you to monetize in just this way simpler and much more meaningful way, which is, hey, I created this digital thing that a bunch of people are enjoying. Let's turn ownership of that thing into an actual commodity, so that, and this can mean a whole bunch of different things. You can make it so that you can only access the content if you own it. And then this becomes this very built-in way to, buy content on the internet. So if you guys have a copy of the podcast, someone is really interested and they really want to know it, maybe there's two models. Either they can listen to it, and, every 10 minutes you take your ad break, and, you talk to them about, look, visit your local car wash today. And then, you continue on with it. Or they say, hey, want to buy a copy of this. And when they buy it, you guys get some amount of money, which is literally the exact money they paid for it. It doesn't have to go through any middleman or anything. And now they own it. And then it goes, like, even beyond that, because, there are lots of things digitally you can sort of get access to a PDF, or, get to the MP4 of the podcast or whatever. And then, you physically have a copy of that. But ownership of this means something a lot deeper. And fundamentally, what that means is you can do more things with it, which is, if I want to transfer ownership to someone else, I can do that. And then we can have it built in that you guys who created the podcast get another cut of that transfer or something. You can have all sorts of rules built into it. And I think it unlocks all sorts of things, that for ways for us to turn value on the internet into, actually making a living. And I think if you can do that, it unlocks all sorts of other, it lets you maybe have a career there where you couldn't have before. I think that feels like that's a pretty worthy goal.
Absolutely. I think that was a great explanation. That's probably the clearest I've ever gotten. And just kind of either further explaining the impact of advertising, right? I think as creators, we are all dependent on advertising. And I love that you mentioned that, because I don't think I can watch any YouTube video now without getting a Manscaped ad, and I'm just like, all right, this
No.
is getting a little weird.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I personal experience. There are just so many.
Yeah, so I think this is definitely going to be transformative for creators and just kind of how we interact online and kind of in society. I think there'll be a great future there. So, with all this in mind, kind of what tips would you give for new founders building a Web3 or blockchain company or kind of working in that space, taking into account like all of the insights that you've kind of gathered from the industry and what we see coming in the future?
Totally. Yeah. I think I would give a couple. Main one is I think really focus on what value you're providing for people, because I think we're seeing sort of every day there's a new basically version of Apes Club or cute cats or whatever,
Yeah,
where it's just a new iteration of it, and the value proposition there is just predicated on all your buyers putting value in the thing and putting value on it because it's hype and because it's on the chain. And if you can get a community to do that, great. Just do it, make some money if you want to. But if you're trying to build something that actually is going to sustain and do something for people, I think you need to really be able to articulate why is what we're doing helping the people who are using it. And I think there are lots of ways it can help, and that's because of the potential of of decentralization and actually owning the content. But I think it really has to change, turn that into an actual use for the people who are using it. And I think it's sort of shocking how much people don't really try to do that or make sure they've done that before sort of hyping their thing widely. I think that's definitely the biggest one. I think, like I've said, a lot of the most successful ones I've seen have had a really clear focus, and I think maybe these two things go together, which is it's a lot easier to say how I'm going to use NFTs to provide a lot of value for real estate investors than to say I'm going to use NFTs to provide value for humans on the internet, because humans on the internet have a lot of different use cases, and so you know that's just a little harder to achieve.
for
Um,
sure.
yeah, I think those might be two main ones.
For sure. And maybe like the flip side to that is kind of, and maybe this is where these tips have come from for you. What was been like the most challenging part of building your startup or kind of building a startup within the blockchain space? And I'm saying that because we were asking for tips, but yeah, we wanted to understand kind of your process as well.
No, totally. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's an important disclaimer that I anticipate many challenges to come, many of them perhaps more challenging than anything we've faced. Um, I think, I'll say two sides to it. One is I think the space itself can just be really intimidating to navigate. And I say this even as someone who, like, A, has had a decent amount of time to understand it and comes in with sort of a technical background where I actually can understand what's going on. And also, I fit the profile of a lot of people in this. I'm sort of young, I'm white, I'm male, I'm techie. Like that does get you a lot farther in sort of being able to move in the space a little more easily. So I think a lot of that is just really intimidating, and so I think that's one big piece. And if you're out there and you don't fit a lot of that, like don't let that stop you. But also, like, it absolutely is hard, and so like sort of apologies in advance for sort of if there are difficulties in that. Other one I'd say is just I think uh, it is hard because the space is so sort of oversaturated, and because the really what I view as the really core contributions are often overshadowed by a lot of sort of the hype and the bubbles and all of that. I think it is hard to try to make it out through that noise, and so I think that is definitely a challenge of working in the space. And I think the thing to do that to get out of that is really all about really clearly communicating your value, and what it is that you make things better for people who use your service.
For sure. So just takeaways there to anyone in the space. Communication is kind of top of mind right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think if you can't communicate to sort of a normal person why they get something from using your platform, then probably time to sort of try to figure out, what it is you're going to do for them.
Yeah. Speaking of learning how to communicate, you've obviously participated in Wine Combinator, so I'm pretty sure they obviously walk through a lot of presentations of what to do and how to find product market fit and whatnot. So how has that helped you in terms of your approach about scaling Dime? And the other thing I'd like to kind of add on is like, how valuable has a network been, and why has that been so valuable?
Totally. Okay, well, we'll take the two pieces. I think it's funny because YC has I think obviously a pretty amazing reputation, and I think it's deserved. But I think one of the things that results in is that when people come into YC, they expect sort of this like sort of these genius insights and these sort of amazing unconventional strategies, and they'll to tell you things like don't worry about your product, just worry about your vision or something. And that is just sort of the absolute opposite of what it's like. Where I think really sort of the thing YC does really well is they've seen a lot of startups, and many of them successful and many more unsuccessful. And so they're just really good about telling you, hey, that thing that we told you to do, you really should do, because the startups that worked all really spent a lot of time doing it. And that thing tends to be things like, hey, talk to your customers. Like, I know you think this is really exciting, and I know you want to spend the next 2 weeks developing this new feature or whatever, but hey, make sure that it's something they want. And I think it could just be shocking, like, not only how hard it is to think of things like that, but how hard it is to like really make yourself believe that that's what you need to do when you really are convinced that you know the next thing to do. And then you spend a bunch of time on that, and then you talk to people, and their problem was sort of like 10 steps farther up the pipeline, and actually you just needed to make it an easier like interface for them to log in or something. And when that's the case, okay, you just get that user feedback as early as possible. And I think YC, their slogan, I think, is build something people want, which I think is just it is pretty fundamental. And so I think a lot of what they're about is take the simple sort of stupid stuff that you kind of know you should be doing, and instead of doing anything exciting, just do that. Just really sort of focus on it. And I think it's kind of something that a lot of founders, absolutely myself included, need to hear. I mean, it really helps to hear from people who have that kind of track record. And then in terms of the community and the network, I think it is pretty amazing. I think this is one place where YC has almost like a cheat code, because it's this very self-sustaining thing where they really do have this amazing community, and I think it's opened a lot of doors for us that it's very lucky, and very very sort of, we feel very fortunate to be part of that. Um, and then of course that's very self-sustaining, because it's worth joining to get that community, and then you get all sorts of other people joining that community and making it even stronger. But if you're considering it, I think it really, I think it was an awesome thing for us.
Yeah. And so, any tips for individuals that are applying, trying to get in Y Combinator? Because, it is like the most prestigious, I guess, accelerator, boot camp, whatever you want to call it. So, we've had so many questions. I'm like, we're not a part of Y Combinator, so let's ask someone who has actually been there and
Totally.
applied for it. So, what are your best tips for getting into the program?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things. They like to invest in founders rather than in ideas. So they want to hear what it is that you're working on, and they want to hear why you believe in it. But they're really more interested in your reasoning and your background, and what they can do to convince yourself that you as a team are going to have success down the long path of sort of creating a startup, which may include many different directions. So I think really, really trying to communicate what you're about is important, not just, I really, this idea I believe in or something, which is also important, but convince them about you as well. I think they are pretty sort of no BS. I think including words like, we believe that our synergy and our dynamic decision making and whatever, like that's not really going to impress them, and I think often we'll sort of get things a little bit lowered. I think it's really be pretty upfront with it. Try to make just a really sort of clear, compelling statement about why this is a good time to do this, why you're a good person to be working on the thing you're working on, sort of what your unique sort of angle is, your unique insight. I think a part of what their thesis would be is that there's a lot of people out there and a lot of ideas, and most people idea combinations are not going to be correct. And so the pitch you really have to make is, hey, why are you, what are you doing? And it's either because of your background or your particular sort of the way your mind works or insights you've had that's going to make you the right person to solve one of these ideas. And I think that's kind of what they look for.
No, I think that kind of covers it. We've talked to a few founders here who've had that experience, and so it's good to get different perspectives and how like what you learned from it and kind of your process and your journey through it. I think everyone has the baseline expectation is it's great, it's a great experience, but everyone has their own kind of perspectives under that.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. It's sort of like it's gray. I mean, it's complicated. It's I think it was awesome and it was absolutely worth it for us. But I mean, it means it ends up looking like a lot of different things. The other thing I would say is also they get so many applicants that I think you can submit the best application in the world, and it's still is a question of chance. And I think we got lucky with that, and I think we submitted a good application, but after that, then we got lucky. And so I think if you don't get in or something like that, you know there were people in our batch who had applied 5 times, and it's not really that they had like were a vastly different person by the 5th time. It's they improved some parts of it, and maybe it was more clearly communicated, and then it happened to catch someone's eye that time. And so I think there is a little bit of just acknowledging that that's part of it as well.
For sure. Ben, thank you so much. I think you've walked us through kind of all of the things that we wanted to cover and what you're doing with Dime and kind of just the blockchain and NFT space. One thing we like to do at the end of our podcast is do a quick lightning rounds where we throw some quick questions at you just to get to know you a bit better. So we have like 5 or 6 questions here that we're just going to toss at you, and you get a couple seconds to answer the first thing that comes to mind.
Let's do it.
Awesome. So first off, what's your favorite book or movie of all time?
Favorite book is probably Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss.
Okay.
Yeah, great, amazing writing, and it's this great fantasy series.
Amazing.
Although we're still waiting for the 3rd book in the series, and it may never come out. So, fair warning.
Is this recent?
This not quite. The first one came out in 2007. So
okay,
so
you've waited a while. Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you're not invested into any NFT projects, but do you have a favorite project right now that you have your eye on? Anything that catches your attention?
Totally. I think I mentioned a couple of these earlier, but I think top 2 for me would probably be Masterworks, and Islands. I think both of those have really cool, specific visions. I think could do well.
For sure. Staying in the space here, do you have a preference between Bitcoin or Ethereum?
I'm pretty open to everything. Yeah, different symbols of value, we'll call it. Not Dogecoin is all I'll say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Elon, we trust Elon a little bit.
I mean, Elon, yeah.
If you could have dinner with one person, maybe any point in time, who would that be?
I've got my like sentimental answer and my rational answer.
Let's do both.
I think top 2 for me might be John von Neumann, which, as you'll guess, might be my rational answer. I've just heard sort of from all his biographies and whatever. He just seems to have been an amazing guy. If you don't know anything about him, sort of look him up. He came up with sort of half of modern sort of calculus and physics in sort of 11 different fields. Just sort of sounds pretty amazing. Other one is Shakespeare. I'm a huge fan, and I think that would just be amazing.
An art fan, we love it. And staying on the topic of dinner here, this is our controversial question on the podcast. Do you like pineapples on your pizza?
I can't believe it's come to this. I'm a kind of no pineapple on pizza person. Yeah. Keep the aesthetic purity, I think, a little bit.
Exactly.
Wow, that's fair. I like it sometimes, but I felt like there was a lot of pain in your voice there.
I don't sort of feel this one as strongly as some people do, where they it's first abomination against God or something. I more just I think pizza does its thing pretty well, and I don't think it's really pineapple's time to shine.
Exactly.
Ben, any last words? Where can we find your work? Where can we find you if anyone wants to connect with you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's been great to get on and talk to you guys. We're going to be live at dime.io. So check it out. If you are a content creator, if you've got any sort of following online, if you've got people you follow who you'd love to see on the platform, you'd love a new way to support them, we'd love to hear it. We have a link for signups and for Rex, where if you want to put someone else's name in as well. Other than that, we're on social media, so you can check us out on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. And just super excited to be getting out there.